I played the role well enough. Things were sorted and cataloged, boxed and filed, and soon Professor Wilcox's belongings were all accounted for. Dr. Richards had stayed the entire time, assisting with the sorting of his former colleagues' belongings. Every now and then he would peer over at me. I could feel him watching. He didn't completely trust me, this was clear. I fought hard not to look over to my bag, where I had stashed the artifact he craved to possess. Uncertain what the evil and glorious thing even was, I was tempted to hand it over and be done with the whole affair. But I couldn't. Professor Wilcox wanted it hidden and gone for a reason. I was going to find out what for. The dangerous curiosity growing inside me needed to be sated. The storm outside was still raging by the time Dr. Richards and I had finished the chore. I kept my gaze low, fearful he could read my thoughts, see that I was hiding something. His eyes were so heavy on me. This man always had an affinity for intimidating the students, even some of the professors. "Thank you for your help, sir," I said as I gathered up my bag and moved to rush out the door. I had to get home. The curiosity of what had fallen into my possession was tempting me. That pharaoh. I could still see him in my mind. The Ankhs hummed, and I couldn't ignore them. I could think of little else. Who was he? I had to know. Dr. Richards stared at me hard, and I could feel him searching me over. "Are you all right?" he asked with an accusing tone. I nodded and tried to dig up the sadness I had felt earlier that afternoon, thinking about Professor Wilcox. "Yes," I assured. "Just sad I'll never see him again." "I see." Dr. Richards crossed his arms across his chest. "Will you be going home now?" My heart leapt in my chest. My body wanted to run, yet it would reveal everything if I did. I wanted to tell him about the wonderful and horrible pharaoh, but knew I couldn't. If Professor Wilcox thought it was dangerous, it had to remain a secret. All of it. I had to go. I had to get away from him. I had to know more about this dark pharaoh. How could he not hear the humming? So loud. "Probably. It's been a long day. Good night." Without waiting for a response, I held my bag close and put on my raincoat. Not meeting his eyes, I walked briskly past him and out of the office. Dr. Richards watched me as I left. Had I given away everything in that moment of weakness? Did he know? He must have. These Ankhs practically cried out to be heard. All the while I felt watched from the shadows as I briskly made my way home. The rain had proven to be a great justification for the speed and width of my quickened stride. The electric lights illuminated the darkening world around me in a sickly yellow light. There was no hiding here. I couldn't risk it, especially if my suspicions were correct and I was being followed. There was nowhere else I could go. If I deterred from my usual path home, Dr. Richards might suspect something. No, I would go home and study the journals. I would learn about this incredible and mysterious pharaoh. I didn't look around once I arrived at my tenant house, a Victorian house owned by an old widow. I couldn't let anyone suspect I knew they were watching. No, I had to be casual, normal. Nothing was wrong. If anything, I had been touched by melancholy, and this was understandable. Once inside, I made sure to secure the door tightly. No one was getting in. This was my mystery. Professor Wilcox wanted it gone, and gone it would be as soon as I found my answers. Quickly, I dashed up the stairs to my room. Once I was certain no other tenants might wander by and see what secrets I was carrying, I made myself ready for the grand discovery to solve the mystery of this artifact and the pharaoh. The idea of light made my stomach quake, but I had to see what Professor Wilcox had written. Boldly, I permitted myself to turn on the electric light by my bookshelf. A frail yellow glow poured forth, casting shadows around my room. The Ankh grew only slightly louder. I did not have to fear anyone else in the house might hear it. The two Ankhs, which acted as one, lay on my living room table, humming like a tuning fork as I gently opened the leather-bound journal, turning the dry pages, seeking anything having to do with the discovery. Despite the trepidations I felt, my thirst for answers had to be satisfied. So I began to read what was the final excursion of my mentor. 5th of June, 1937. At long last, we have reached the location dictated in Dr. Richards' instructions. 5 days in this godforsaken desert. The dry land of pelting sand in a near-constant windstorm under an unyielding sun to our left, and the salty, rawing maw of an angry sea crashing into the landscape, threatening, daring us to come closer so it may swallow us on our right. It's enough to drive even the strongest men mad. My time here has been nothing short of frightening and humbling thus far. My arrival in this land of desert was kilometers away, a small port by a crude seaside village, the closest landing point, Richards had assured me when he told me the plans. The sea proved to be too rough for any safe passage by boat closer to the destination he had marked for me. From here, I and the men he had hired for the expedition would travel along the coast to the coordinates. The men were there to greet me on the dock. The look of fear upon their weather-beaten, leathery faces was clear as the sky above us. I wrote it up as trepidations of such a long and likely dangerous journey and reluctance to enter what the people here called the land of dark gods. The evil and chaotic storms kept everyone out. My presence assured them the journey was to commence. It was real now. Dr. Richards had obviously paid them well for such a journey. Every man has his price. While safe in the village, surrounded by natural rock formations, the wind, the constant, unrelenting wind, was a stranger to me. Now my face bleeds where the sand managed to get beneath my coverings. Out there, exposed, I relied more on the men than my own senses. I was blinded and deafened by the power of the desert and the burning sun. My escorts knew the dangers of this unforgiving land and came prepared for my ignorance with extra materials. I am truly grateful for these brave souls. Without them, I would surely be lost and destroyed. Upon the 3rd day, I started to wonder if Richards had sent me out here to die in his place. That old body of his isn't fit for something this arduous. As he said, he wants this artifact at all costs. All the same, I must ponder as to how Malcolm Richards, a man born and raised outside of Providence, came upon knowledge of such a natural phenomena for which we now wait. More than this, how could he possibly know about this artifact and its peculiar location? According to his research and our instructions, we are to wait and watch the sea. The wet desert will fall back. Then the structure will be revealed. Go to the throne. There you will find the artifact. Richards must believe the local lore of this place. Our work is only guided by myths and legends, not defined by them. Nowhere in the historic records of this land is what Richards has described to me. There is no mention of such a drying of the ocean ever uttered here. When I stated my objections, he assured me this great drying only occurs once every 5,000 years. Once an eon. And I had to trust his knowledge. He may be going mad in his old age, and I fear he may have sent me out here for nothing. All the same, I will wait here in this cavern by the sea, sheltered from the wind of the desert. Regardless of what does or doesn't happen tonight, there will be no other chance. 6th of June, 1937, midnight. I can't believe it. Richards was right. The myths, the predictions, the drying, it's all true. My escorts are howling in disbelief at the sight before our very eyes. I had to write it down before I convinced myself this was all a dream brought about by dehydration or sun poisoning. The ocean is gone. Before the cavern in front of us, far out into where the sea had once been, stands a great monolith. Even from this distance, I can make out carvings along the gargantuan surface by light of the enormous full moon above us. Where has the sea gone? Now we only have the sound of the wind stirring up the dry sands of the desert behind us. All around, tide pools spot the now drying land, as if the desert has dared to claim the ocean as its own. Not a mile off where the shore had been, where not hours ago had been hidden by salt water and crashing waves. Now this overpowering structure stands. I must calm the men. They are to take this journey with me to the monolith. They must be reminded they are being paid a small fortune, and I will not go alone. Even with my own trepidations, I am a man of science and facts. I will not be swayed by superstitions or old religions. Everything can be explained. 18th of June, 1937. After days of shaking and trying to rationalize what I have seen in that monolith, I am finally able to take pen to the pages of my journal again. The artifact is somehow still with me, and I am somehow back home. Despite it all, I managed to hold on. Perhaps it was out of a sense of duty. More than likely, I fear it is something else. A devotion to what it all means and what I had seen inside it. I am a man of facts, so I will write down what I remember, no matter how impossible it may sound. Let this be my final deed. The men and I cautiously approached the tall structure by the light of the full moon, directed by an iridescent glow radiating from the monolith itself. The damp sand made for an easier journey than the dryness of the desert behind us. We were slow in our steps, fearful and doubtful of our own senses. The wind of the desert blew behind us, pushing us, aiding us towards the dark tower, still dripping with salt water, draped in seaweed. I slowed my stride to examine the indecipherable carvings. Not a space along either face of the monolith was spared. Every inch of this foreign structure had been worked. By whom, by which culture, I knew not. From the carvings I could see clearly, they had echoes of something vaguely Egyptian in their fashion, mixed with influences from other cultures I had never seen before. All of the carvings depicted otherworldly creatures, perhaps the deities of this extinct microculture, long lost to the passage of time, lost due to their isolation, perhaps. What struck me as nearly impossible was the very structure itself. The monolith was solid black, shining like obsidian. When I placed a hand upon it, I could feel a vibration and heat resonating from it, as if the thing were alive. Further still, I did not see a single seam to indicate where the stone met another stone to form the monolith. The entire structure was made from a single foreign stone, the origin of which will forever be a mystery to me. After I had come back to the front again, the men were staring at the corpse of a dead shark outside the entrance. No door, only a wide opening with a staircase leading down. In English, I had beckoned them to follow me as I lit a torch. I still don't know if they understood my words, but they clearly understood what I wanted. Collectively, they shook their heads and made the hand signs to ward off evil. They would go no further, so I entered the dark monolith alone. Immediately, I could feel the subtle vibrations of the structure, as I did outside. All around me, the entire monolith hummed. It was unnerving, but I moved on, doing my best to ignore it, certain there was a reason behind this oddity. I descended far down, ever keeping my hand upon the slimy wall to prevent myself from slipping. Below the staircase, a wide hall appeared before me. All around, I could see the sea life that had lost their lives in the unexpected drying of the ocean. Along the dark stone floor, crustaceans crawled and displayed their claws to threaten me as I approached. This far below the ocean floor, and it still dried. I dare to hypothesize right here and now, this monolith was designed to drain during the drying of the sea. The structure was put here deliberately, but by whom? Perhaps him. Who else could or would have done this? For a moment I stood, awed by the overwhelming length of the underground expanse. Despite the thousands of years under the ocean, the walls remained polished, reflecting the light of my torch and the colors of my clothes as I slowly skulked through the vast hall, trying to take in whatever the alien structure had to offer. As I moved further down the hall, the only direction I had to go by, sculptures appeared in dips in the black walls. These structures, I don't even know what to make of them. They appeared to be some of the creatures I saw carved outside on the faces of the monolith. These alien creatures, messes of mouths and tentacles, all on pedestals high above the floor, all created from stone similar to the one of the monolith, except white in color. On the far end of the vast hall, the walls opened further into a sphere. There, in the center of the dark room, stood a throne of golden skulls. I felt the fear building inside me as I beheld exactly what Richards had predicted. But I had to remain logical. There was no reason to be afraid here. There had been no dangers, only unknowns. I was determined my logical mind would prevail. Shaking the anxiety brought on by my lack of knowledge, I approached the macabre throne. It didn't take long to realize the skulls were not quite human, although eerily similar. I wasn't here for that. I was here for what sat on the throne, upright and held in place, as Richard had predicted. The Black Ankh. Once my hand touched the Ankh, I could feel the same vibration within the artifact. Thinking quick motions would make the process easier, I removed the Ankh from its place on the throne. Once the blade-like end had been taken from the holding vessel, I heard a loud click from the throne. All around, the vibrations of the structure became far greater than it had been, to a point where I became alarmed the entire thing would come tumbling down. My ears began to ring as the subtle humming now erupted to a high-pitched frequency. Moving my hands to cover my ears while gripping the artifact, I ran back the way I came, ignoring the disturbing sights around me. For the first time during the entire expedition, I truly thought I might die. With an energy and vigor I had not thought I'd possess, I dashed up the stairs. The structure began to quake. How I managed to do it, I will never know. But as my energy began to waver, I was met with the stinging sand and fresh air. I made it out of the monolith. My relief was only short-lived, as once I leapt out into the open air, I had entered into a tempest. Lightning, a near constant stream of lightning, was pouring from the sky. The men were already retreating back to the shore, to the cavern. I too began to sprint back to the cover of our seaside sanctuary. Daring to take one more look at the state of the monolith after all the tremors, I gasped. There was no lightning storm. The sky was still cloudless. Arcs of electricity were bursting from the very peak of the monolith. Then a terrible realization entered my mind. I had done this. When I removed the Ankh, I woke up the monolith. The entire thing was a monstrous machine, and I held the key in my hand. I couldn't afford to feel guilt in the moment. Again, I turned to run for cover. The monolith was screaming with power from behind us. The deafening sounds of electricity, the very heat of it all, kept us running. An arc struck a tidal pool very close to me. Still I ran. It was then the Ankh, the goal of this unholy expedition, began to divide and expand in the grip of my hand. In the space in the divided Ankhs, I saw it. I saw him, a pharaoh of darkness upon the throne of golden skulls, the one from within the very monolith from which I fled. He locked his white, pupilless eyes with mine, white against the deep darkness of his very being. Here, my body fell onto what was the ocean floor. I fell to the sound of a loud, deep laughter coming from the dark pharaoh. What I saw next, I dare not write. I cannot write. The words, the truth of what I had seen. No, I can't let it happen. The fabric of reality torn away. The very future of everything we know. Everything we are. I awoke in the cavern, still holding tight to the Ankh. The void, the vortex, the portal, whatever it was, had vanished. The Ankh had returned to the way I had originally found it. The humming had stopped. Outside, the sun was shining on a new morning. Waves crashed against the shore. The ocean had returned, and the monolith was hidden under the dark water for another 5,000 years. I tucked away the Ankh and was numb to every sense. All I could think about was that pharaoh and those visions. Now I am in my office back in Providence. I haven't dared to touch the Ankh since I hid it away. Richards must not know what this thing is, what it holds. Even if he does, I can't let what I have seen happen. Yet I don't have the strength to touch the Ankh anymore. I have failed as a man of reason. I have failed humanity with my own weaknesses. This thing must be undone, and someone else is going to have to do it. Richards is asking about the artifact, and I have no answers. I must count on another. The visions won't stop. Every time I close my eyes, I see him. I see his ambitions. I see his plans. I see everything falling apart in favor of a new age. From within the confines of my safe, I can hear it. I can hear him calling. If you happen upon these words, know that I am sorry. Be stronger than I was, and save us all. Goodbye. James Wilcox. I sat in stunned silence for I don't know how long. My hands weakened, and Professor Wilcox's final words fell from my hands and onto the Ankh in front of me. Outside, lightning tore through the darkness very close to my window, followed by a horrible crash of thunder. I awoke from my shock and witnessed something I had hoped for, but didn't expect. The two Ankhs resounded in response, an octave higher than their previous pitch, and began separating further. Just as suddenly, they returned to their original position, one upon the other, not touching. All of it happened over the span of a few seconds. But I knew what I saw. There was no mistake. It was all real. The Pharaoh, the place of shadows, the throne of golden skulls. It was all there. He was calling to me. Me now. Electricity was the key after all. Professor Wilcox was right in his assessment. Then there was the mystery as to how Dr. Richards had known all of this. The time, the place, all of it was on point. How could he have predicted such an unusual occurrence like the drying of the ocean no historian had ever heard of? Most importantly, what did Wilcox see? What was so terrible he would be willing to throw away what was possibly the greatest find in all of history? I had to know. I had to seek this pharaoh and these visions for myself. This had to be recorded and studied. In all the chaos, my head spinning, I never heard the approaching steps. I never thought to keep myself safe. Everything had been about this artifact and my foolish curiosity, as I finally began to find more mysteries to solve about this artifact, this unholy and wondrous thing which has cost lives. I was struck from behind. Everything went dark as I fell to the floor.